Okay, I'm gonna call to order the Lenox Public Schools School Committee meeting of March 20th, 2023. And first I want to acknowledge that we lost one of our former students last week, Sean Coakley. Many of you may have seen him perform in Shakespeare or other plays at the high school. The one where the plan eats everybody, whatever that one was called. Little Shop of Horror, Shop of Horrors, say that a few times. But anyway, Sean, fortunately, passed away last week. Condolences to his family. Very hard time for them. Anyway, hearing of public visitors. I think people are here for other reasons tonight. I don't know if you have anybody who's online who wants to speak.
Does anyone online who'd like to speak, just raise your hand. You're not seeing any hands raised.
Okay. We will move on then. I have no correspondence tonight. Board report, we have the school committee meeting minutes of February 27th.
I'll move to accept the minutes of February 27th, since it was my birthday.
Well, second, since it was your thing.
This was my birthday.
Any comments? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All in favor? Aye. So. And we'll move to the superintendent's reports. And that's what I think and
That's what we're here for, right?
well, one second.
Superintendent's report.
Keep in mind that when we're done with the part that includes you, you don't have to stay all night. You're gonna be here for a while tonight.
But you're welcome,
But you're welcome to, but I
especially
think
if you really like numbers.
it makes us look good. It's a big crowd.
Well, it's really fantastic to have a full room tonight. And it's particularly fantastic because we have students in the room tonight. We often do recognition around high school students. We have high school students who sit at the table and those who are recognized for the superintendent's award. But it's fantastic tonight to have some students from Morris Elementary here who are being recognized. About a year ago in December of 2021, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, that's the board that governs all of K-12 education in Massachusetts, they approved a Student Achievement Award, which was designed to recognize a subset of high achieving students who scored exceeding expectation in the English language arts and or math in any grade level on the 2022 MCAS. The program, again, recognized students who were high achiever both on the regular exam and also on the portfolio exam. This recognition was really based on growth that these particular students demonstrated as part of their academic performance and development. So when I received this packet, I think it was the week I arrived on the job in December, they said, hey, here's the sample packet. You may be receiving this. You may not be, but you may be. So it was very exciting when we got notice through Principal Kelly that 4 of our students had been recognized for this Board of Education designation and award. So I'm really pleased to announce these 4 exceptional students and welcome their families tonight. I'm sure you're incredibly proud of what they've accomplished. So our 4 students, and I'll have Ms. Kelly in a minute just introduce them, but are hopefully I'll get your names pronounced correctly. Declan Lizald, Janum Patel, Ellen Davidson, and Aubrey McDaniel. So again, really excited to have you all here. We're incredibly proud of you. And I think I'm going to turn over the floor to Principal Kelly, who will say a few words and then distribute their awards. Yeah.
Why don't you guys come on up here with me? So I just want to say, all of the Morris staff are so very proud of how hard you all work all year long. You are awesome students. You work hard during the day and you are model students when we're outside at lunch and recess. And we're super proud of you and it's great to be recognized for all your hard work. So here you go, Jacqueline. Something fantastic to hang on your refrigerator. Great job, guys.
Congratulations.
You all want a photo op?
Yeah.
Please, yeah, why don't you just get a photo op.
What I'll do is I'll send them to Amy and then we.
Great, great.
You need to
Who can have photos.
add some photos for the.
The difference, Principal Kelly, is I couldn't see you, I tried to see the children. So if you can get in there.
Thank you.
Lots of head things moving around, which the kids will have to teach me about. There, we'll see. Thank you.
And Veronica, yeah.
I'm gonna send them to Amy so she can make sure everybody's got photo permission and then let her decide what to do. But I can send it to you too, Joe. If you want.
I'm not gonna do it.
Just get photo.
Yeah. So congratulations, students, again, the award, just so folks in the public know, it includes a certificate of achievement, which I flashed up. Includes a letter of recognition from the board, $20 Target gift card, which we hope you'll spend on yourself. And again, we're really proud to recognize what I call 4 scholars who really represent all the students K-12 who did exceptionally on the MCAS. And this is just a small representative sample who I think again represent the larger student body who just does exceptional work in the classroom and in the community. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So on the other end of the continuum, we have a lot of college acceptances rolling in. We're excited to report those out. Students who are making their plans, post-graduation, and our seniors will be a focus of a lot of celebrations over the coming months. But I did want to call out senior Noah Kirby. Noah is a particular note because we found it this week that he was accepted into the Air Force Academy. So getting into an academy, as you know, is an incredibly challenging and rigorous process. And I just wanted to congratulate Noah and his family. Noah is an active member of our LPS community. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. He's active in athletics, music, and community service. And outside of all this stuff, he's learned how to fly, how to actually pilot a plane. I'm quite jealous, actually. And as he wrote in his essay, this included him overcoming the fear of flying, literally. So Noah was sponsored by Representative Richard Neal. In order to obviously apply to an academy, you have to have a sponsor. So we're also thankful to Representative Neal for supporting Noah. So congratulations, Noah.
Might add that he had his pilot's license before he had his driver's license.
Well, yeah, it's not that he started taking lessons at 14, right? Amazing. Be awesome there. Also, more generally, wanted to congratulate and thank the seniors for inviting me to their retreat last week. Whether they wanted me there or not. I really want to thank Amy Novitsky, among others, who really put together a great day and event for the seniors. It's a day in which they get to come together as a class outside of school, bond a little bit more, make those connections, learn some transitional skills, and hopefully be inspired about in terms of what lies ahead for them. We had a lot of people who went into making the day successful. I'll just quickly name them off: Tara Romeo and Pam Murray from Guidance, Joe Bazzano and Karen Romeo Ledger, who are the class advisors, Shakespeare and Company, who hosted us, Beg Marcioni from Shakespeare, Freak Pinston was our keynote speaker, and I was able to hang with him. He's a former student from Pittsfield, so it was great to see him again, and he got us doing push-ups and thinking deeply about our lives, so a lot of fun. Shannon Gagliardi from Food Service, Adams Community Bank, Kimball Farms, Lee Bank, Tess Sorrentino, Adams Community Bank, Allison Brigham from Lee Bank, Robbie Bogart from Canyon Ranch, Amy Higgins from the school system, Kayla Gresser from Canyon Ranch, Ariana Taylor from Weedos, and Hillary Maximilian and Jed Hall. Who also, and all these folks did support a variety of activities, from meditation to yoga to self-defense, to thinking about, technology use. So really enjoyed the time with them. So thanks, Amy, for everyone who put together a very successful day. Really fun. The kid, you have great students here. I just want to say that, right? I've been a lot of places. Your students are great. So for juniors, I want to just mention to juniors and other students who are still in high school and will be with us next year again, a lot of information coming out of guidance right now. So please pay attention, families, to the guidance release. I know Principal Ames putting out regular updates, weekly updates on all the stuff that's coming through guidance, summer job, BCC free courses for dual enrollment. A lot of stuff is tracking right at this time of year, so take advantage of it. Wanted to thank Brenda, Principal Kelly, and all the individuals who were involved in Read Across America. I think you saw my last newsletter. I think Megan was actually the poster child in the newsletter. So we were careful not to show, be careful about, student faces, and Megan was participating in the day, and it was really a great day interacting with the students. Also got a chance to visit with the Kimball Farms folks and appreciate their donation to the scholarship fund. It was nice to be part of their membership meeting. I thought I was going to be talking to 8 or 10 people, and it was a room full of probably 80 people. So it was nice just to talk a little bit about what was happening in the district and thank them for their for the support of all that we do. Again, I appreciate all the patience last week that went into navigating some tricky weather, and for everyone safely navigating 2 pretty interesting snow days for us. But I do want to send a particular thanks out to the people who work behind the scenes, our custodians who are working there really hard to ensure that the schools were open, the sidewalks were clear, our drivers who drive the buses, navigating around really tight corners, our staff who greet our students and their families, and our office staff who deal with a lot of phone calls, navigating families who are anxious about coming and going to school, and it really does take a team approach to get through these tricky days. And of course, Melissa, who takes my call at 4 in the morning, so.
Your text.
Right, my text, right. As I mentioned, we are heading into what I refer to as testing season, and I always say test is not a definition of who we are, but is an important part of what we do. And so I know Principal Ames just sent out an attendance letter to remind his school community about the importance of being in school and on time. I know that Principal Kelly will reinforce the same practices in school and on time, well rested, well fed, and with confidence. And I know our kids are going to perform again. Was really excited to attend the performance in Chicago by the theater group at the high school. They did a tremendous job with what I think is a great play. It's a fun play. It's got great music, and our kids just did an exceptional job. The individuals who carry the lead roles just have amazing voices, and I think you really do a lot with the student body you have. So congratulations to the cast and crew of Chicago. Related to weather, we also had to navigate the DC trip, which we'll be talking about again in a few minutes. But we did successfully send off our students to Washington, DC on a day that was a snow day. And we, again, appreciate Dr. Ames working with me and his staff and Dave Pugh, really the 24 hours that led into their send off, and everything went off, I think as well as could be expected. And the kids had a couple of really productive days in DC, and we look forward to hearing more about maybe some specifics of what they encountered and what they did. I think it'd be important for that, for the committee to hear. Just a couple more updates. The principal search, again, thanks to the committee who will be serving over the next 2 nights on the principal search for middle and high school. We will be interviewing 5 candidates over the next 2 nights, and then I'm fortunate that Dr. Collins is actually gonna be able to join us remotely. And so he will be zooming in and being able to listen to the various interviews, and then he and I will discuss about next steps in terms of how we want to move forward, finalize and engage in the process. But it is a process moving forward. It's one of the things you asked me to tackle for you when you asked me to join your district. So we are successfully moving along, and I do appreciate the school committee members, Veronica and Megan, who are serving on that search team. We file a lot of reports, and I think sometimes you see those and sometimes you don't. A lot of things happen behind the scenes. We just filed the Student Opportunity Act report, our quarterly SIMS report. We're doing English language learner monitoring, which Brian Kelly is leading for us. So a variety of things, just did amendments or entitlement grants, a lot of stuff happening that I just want to make sure you report, that I report to you all that we are on target and meeting our deadlines and our compliance items when it comes to business in the school district. We have some upcoming things. Our quiz team is headed to As Schools Match Wits. We got a middle school spelling bee coming up, family movie night. So all kinds of interesting things that I know you're hearing, the parents are hearing through the both of the principals' newsletters on a weekly basis. And then finally, I've had a couple inquiries around the calendar for next year, and I just want to let everyone know that we will be bringing the proposed 23-24 school calendar to the committee at the next meeting, and we can discuss that and hopefully move that forward as folks think about making their plans for next year. So that completes my remarks. Thank you very much.
So we are at the point now where we're gonna go formally into the school committee budget hearing. It's a public hearing. It's been posted in the paper. It's appropriate, and so we'll have a presentation by Dr. Everwine and Melissa about where we are, and we'll see if there's any comments from the public, and then we'll move on to a motion to approve. That motion is in our pack.
So thank you. So again, we appreciate all the dialogue and thought and conversation that we've had at the committee level around this budget. We have listened, and hopefully this budget reflects the things that we've heard, and we look forward to obviously additional conversation and ultimately your endorsement on the budget. Also appreciate the consult we've had with the chair and vice chair as we did agenda setting, and also with the finance subcommittee towards the end of last week. So this is what we're calling a proposed budget, FY24 budget. I do have a slideshow. It's in front of you right now. So we've had two budgets since the very beginning, which we've been describing to you all: a level service budget and a I guess at one point it was called a preliminary budget. Now we're calling it the proposed budget. You're going to see slight changes in both of these numbers based on the adjustments that we've made. We're going to kind of tackle these in pieces, but the level service budget, just to sort of cut to the chase, reflected all things that currently are in place in the district continuing forward with the required cost of living increases, contractual increases, expectations around increases in things like utilities, things of that sort. The increase was 2.76% on the operating side, with when benefits added in was a 3.43 increase. We brought your preliminary budget, which we have then debated and discussed, and tonight we're bringing you the proposed budget, which reflects a 3.92% increase on operating, which with benefits added in is a 4.33% total increase. I'll get into the details now. So our adjustments since last meeting is we made two basic adjustments. One is to the level service budget, one is to the proposed budget, and I'll just briefly describe those. For the level service budget, the original budget, and Melissa, you can jump in any time to help me out. The original budget was marked out at just under $12 million as a level service budget, which again, as I mentioned earlier, reflected some increases. We have since adjusted the level service budget down, and that decrease reflects about a $23,000 variance. That decrease is the result of additional section analysis which I had mentioned at the last meeting we were going to be doing as part of our scheduling work. But after consult with Dr. Ames, as he's been building the schedule, we are very confident that we can we can maintain level function on the number of extra sections we had last year in the FY23 budget in FY24. So because we had added additional sections in last budget, this actually reflects as a decrease in service. Am I describing that correctly?
Yes, we were able to decrease in the English and language, additional section portions. So that's why it dropped the level service because of the English.
So the bottom line here is that the number of additional sections that we had used this year in FY23 will be the same number of sections that we are planning on for next year. It could be that we're even possibly lower than that, but that'll be determined as we get a little bit further in the scheduling. This gives us a little bit of wiggle.
Would it be okay if I just interject? I just
Please.
wanna, I don't always wanna assume that everybody that's watching has a full understanding of this part of it. I think this additional sections thing is sometimes a little bit mired. People don't always understand what that means. So either if you want to explain or I can explain as I understand it, but it might be better if you do, because I do think like people thinking, oh, we're cutting sections might be we're cutting availability of education, which we're not, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, so the short of it is, as an example, a high school teacher would normally have under the collective bargaining agreement an assignment of 5 teaching periods in the course of a day. In some cases where the demand for based on student scheduling requires that we might want to schedule an additional section, but don't necessarily have the resources to hire another teacher, teachers can agree under the collective bargaining agreement to teach a 6th period. When they teach a 6th period, they get additional compensation for that. That additional compensation is what we suggest is an additional section. So this past year, we had 15 sections additionally taught, and that is the proposal for this year. We'll have a number of teachers who are teaching, 15 teachers who are teaching an additional 6th period.
And am I also correct that sometimes that I also might represent an elective offering, for example, with high school? So if teachers are feeling that students have a strong interest in something that would be a more robust or a more in-depth, whether it's creative writing or an additional art class or English, something like that, that makes our offerings to students really robust and also prevents, as they get upper in class, having too many study halls, etc. Teachers really have a chance to kind of create some interest in, I think, some vital education without us having to hire in new faculty. So it's really a quite excellent opportunity for our students and our faculty to teach interesting, not that all these topics aren't interesting, but things that are a little bit different, and that can change from year to year too. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, I'd say it does 2 things. One is it absolutely does that. It allows us to offer the array and the breadth of courses in terms of electives and options for students. The second thing it does is when you're a small high school like Lenox Middle Memorial is, you can get into challenges with students having a hard time getting courses because with singletons, courses compete with each other. So it's tough when you're scheduling. And so what that also allows us to do is add additional sections in so that students actually have access to courses. So it's both the breadth of courses and reducing the number of scheduling conflicts. A little bit of both.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And thank you for indulging me. I do think that
that's
sometimes that
important.
gets, we understand it, but the public doesn't know it.
Yeah, that's important. And I know that we're doing sort of a high level review, having done a lot of work in the budget, but if some folks may be tuning in for, this might be their first look at it. So thanks for prompting me on that. So the next slide is the proposed operating budget. And from the preliminary, which you saw at the last meeting, which is the budget we were discussing, and the proposed, we've had a reduction of about $123,000. And these changes are going to be associated with what we're describing in the next couple of slides. And I'm hoping that the organization, this makes sense to you all, but don't be shy about asking questions if it doesn't. So the first slide, I think as you all remember, we started with a level service budget and then we compared that to our what we refer to as a value add. Those are the additional things that we were requesting as investments in the system. So these are the additions that we are suggesting be retained in the proposed FY24 budget above the level service budget. Okay. So they include the Morris Literacy Paraprofessional, the Morris Kindergarten Paraprofessional, the movement of 0.3 full-time equivalent school adjustment counselors from ESSER onto operating, partial funding of textbooks, which are the science textbooks at Morris, additional funds for the high school field trip requests of $20,000. Keep in mind that the original request was 30. And then the movement from originally having a full-time technician on salary to contracted service to support a help desk technical work at the across the district. So these are the additions which we added to the level service budget, which ultimately is what constitutes your proposed budget.
Similarly, can I interject before you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
So again, for those watching, ESSER, if we can just explain ESSER's grant funding that came out of COVID to support student learning and to try to fill in gaps of really a number of different categories of students struggling from impact of all of the work that had happened to protect people from COVID. And then if you can explain, like, I mean, I can explain it, but I don't want to do it just about me, but I think again, when people see that, I had to figure it out. It means that we're moving from paying for that with grants to paying it for in our regular budget, rather than
That's right. So,
suddenly next year seeing an even bigger chunk.
yeah, as we've discussed in previous meetings, and again, folks who are tuning in might not have access to that discussion. All districts receive a number of grants, federal, state, in some cases, private grants. And those grants typically fall outside the operating budget. And so this particular grant, the ESSER grant, is really a grant that's designated for COVID relief. It was a sort of a 3-phase grant in which district Commonwealth received money, districts across the country received money. And as a result, you've all discussed this, putting particular personnel and services and equipment. And in some cases, in year one, you were literally buying personal protective gear, right? Things to keep your schools safe and clean. Not that any of us want to remember back that far, but you know, wipes and things of that sort. So the idea here was in ESSER, we had school adjustment counselors, which were hired as part of additional support for students around social and emotional learning, making the transition back to school. We have petitioned the committee to transition part of those positions into the operating budget with the understanding that we would continue that transition in next year's budget. I think with the recognition that we believe these are necessary positions for the district. There are other funds, Title I, and as Melissa pointed out, private funds where we're sort of thinking about ways in which we can utilize those funds to offset things like the field trip requests additionally.
So Jake, if I may, just so, and I apologize to cover this. So we're leaving we're just leaving the Morris, student adjustment counselor in ESSER. We're leaving the LMHS student adjustment counselor in ESSER. Are we rationalizing what we believe the pay would be for the technician? Or are we just we're just figuring we can hire someone or do something? If at all, we're just moving the numbers down for that.
I think the idea behind the technology position is that we wouldn't be hiring anyone. In terms of an employee in the district, we would be looking to contract or outservice for some number of hours in a given week. And maybe it's 10 hours a week, maybe it's 15 hours a week. We would obviously try to stretch that to the degree we could, and that would begin to relieve a little bit of Randy's time to keep him focused on sort of the higher level projects in the district.
And then the ELA interventionist.
I'm gonna be on the next page. Come on. No, it's great. It's a great question, because it's not here.
Yeah, I was gonna assume it was going into Esther, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
So these are the additions, and again, just to sort of really hammer this down, this is the amount of money in which your budget grows beyond level service, right? Okay. So now the next slide is really, what did we adjust since the last budget you saw? What came out, right? And what came out was $25,000 in textbooks, but I just want to be crystal clear. It's not that the textbooks disappeared. It's just that we're funding them differently. We took them out of the operating budget, and our intention is to fund them through ESSER and or a combination of ESSER and Title I. So we'd still be funding the $31,000 that you originally saw in the first budget, just in different ways. We also reduced the field trip amount by $14,000. The original request was for $34,000, 17 from each of the departments. We kept $20,000 in the budget and reduced the overall ask by 14,000. So from 34 to 20. And then the idea would be we would offset this with grant funds. If you just came with me for 1 minute, I've got to pull up my notes here. We did work with Dr. Ames and his staff, Ben Weaver, who was fantastic working with the team to get really solid costs on everything, and looking at we've talked a lot about the 10th grade trip to DC, but also have referenced the trips in 11th grade, American Studies trips, and then the 12th grade humanities and elective trips. Ben put together budgets that included, they were all inclusive, meaning food too, and budgets that didn't include food. And so it was kind of an interesting way to think about it in sort of two tiers. But the total amount now for field trips at the high school is, if you approve this tonight, if they had $26,000 in the account already, would be an additional 20, which would get the total amount funded for field trips to $46,000. When we look at adding up the numbers, if we went all in with every trip, not a penny for any child, it would tally to about $57,000. If we went all in with the DC trip, then the other trips were paid for except for food, it's just under $50,000. And if we go all in, if we run all the trips, none of the trips have any food allowances, it's around 42,000. So we're thinking we're somewhere between sort of option 2 and 3, and wanting to fully support DC, but then thinking alternatively about how we offset the balance of some of the costs and the other trips. So I think if you were to fund the $20,000, the staff at the middle and high school would be incredibly thankful, and would also work very hard to ensure that all students have access to the trip, and those who need additional funds for things like food stipends would surely get that. So that's the field trip. Obviously, we noted the additional sections here, which is just really an accounting piece for Melissa. But the two big things here, the big thing really that David just raised is the interventionist. And, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and I really did appreciate your comments. And I'll be honest with you, I feel we've got more work to do on this before I can really, I think, confidently say, you got to do this. So my thought is we need to do additional review by both our current team, but also by Dr. Collins and the next middle and high school principal. And then If and as it makes sense, for this position to be put in place with a solid plan brought to the committee and presented, I think they could do that and petition for ESSER funds to be invested to cover the position for a pilot year. So that's really what I'm suggesting we do is, I'm not a guy who likes to kick things down the road, to be honest with you. I like to solve problems and move on and not leave them to other people. But I think in this case, I'm not quite confident enough to argue that we have a strong argument as I think could be made if that's decided by the incoming team. And then finally, we had a little bit of an adjustment in the tech position because we originally had that, I think, at $45,000. So that was the offset. So I'll tally it up. If you go to the next slide, you'll just see how things changed a bit from the preliminary budget, which you saw on the 27th, to the proposed budget. We went from 529 433. Melissa did a nice job of just sort of identifying how that changed around revenue and sort of the net budget versus the budget with benefits. And then the next slide just very quickly describes how this year's budget stacks up to last year's budget. And that's where we get to the percent change of 4.33%, with obviously the total net budget increasing by under 4%, insurance a little bit of a heavier hit. All that tallied to 433. So I can go back to slides. I mean, that's really kind of a very quick high level overview. I know you've discussed a lot of these pieces at length in former meetings, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And Principal Kelly and Ames are here in the room, as well as our Assistant Superintendent for Business and Operation.
Okay, so I wanted to just thank Jake and Melissa, Jeremiah and Brenda, and all the other people who helped make this, get us to this point. I thank Warren, Christine from the Finance Subcommittee, because we've had meetings about this too. And obviously the full committee has had robust discussions getting us to here. So any committee members wish to talk about any aspect of this? Anybody in the public wish to have a comment on this?
I better check and see if there's anyone there.
Yeah, you better tell us.
I can't tell. All right, no one has their hand raised.
Okay. Then what we need, and you've got a proposed motion sheet, I'll need somebody to read that as proposed.
I'm happy to do it, but don't wanna step on the toes of the wonderful finance committee who's worked very hard on this. If you're prepared to do it, that's fine with me.
I don't want to be it. It has a lot of numbers in it.
Go for it, right. I move to approve the proposed fiscal, I move to approve the fiscal year 2024 budget. I'm gonna start over. I'm gonna move to approve a gross operating budget in the amount of $14,069,206 for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2023 and ending on June 30th, 2024. I move to approve, I'm gonna do them in three parts and approve each part, okay. Move to approve the application of $1,977,740 in revenue for the reduction of the fiscal year 2024 gross budget from the following sources. 1, school choice receipts of $1,705,000. 2, non-choice tuition receipts of $125,000. 3, theater receipts of $7,500. 4, preschool receipts of $40,000. 5, special education circuit breaker receipts of $76,240. 6, building use receipts of $13,000 and 7 miscellaneous receipts of $11,000. Part 3. To see if the town of Lenox will vote to raise and appropriate the net sum of $12,091,466 for the school department's fiscal 2024 operating budget.
Is there a second?
I will second the motion.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye. And with my reiteration of thanks to everyone who worked so hard on this,
And thank you for reading
really
it.
appreciate it.
somebody's got a real big one to read in a few minutes, so. Thank you. Okay, we have the internet safety policy, IJMD, for a second read.
So just very quickly, you had asked me, and I'm hoping I reflected the changes that you asked me to change minors to students. So I'm basically have changed language throughout the documents to just reflect access by all students. There may still be a reference or two in here to minors, but where I could swap them out, I did. I think that was the only change you all requested.
There was actually one more thought, but I don't remember what our ultimate, I know what I asked, but I don't remember what we ultimately decided. Which was individuals shall reimburse the district for repair, and I think. Since this also references our policy, but then there would be regulations, you know, for example. 3 strikes if a student is intentionally, I mean, how we actually deal with reimbursement, seems like it's discretionary in some ways. So I think we discussed putting may be requested to or may reimburse. And then would refer that to an internal policy around, I think it's this concept of. Well, damage, well, what kind of damage, well, do we have, you know, if we know that students are intentionally. And I think actually when Randy was here, he addressed some of it, but there's some things where you're like. Stuff just happens, or sometimes. You know, so the shall was a concern. That maybe we could say may, and then we could have a more robust policy as. That's not our policy, but the internal.
Yeah. I have a comment on that.
Yeah.
My concern is that if we say may, we may be leaving, you know, we need to be sure that however we structure this, that it's fair across the board. I think it may, unless there's a definitive set of procedures involved, we open ourselves to perhaps the opportunity for, you have to make sure everything's fair and handled in the same way. And while there would be discretion with may, something like reimbursing, I think has to be, those discretionary issues have to be clear cut. Or else we're gonna be like, well, why did this person have to pay and that person didn't have to pay?
I 100% agree. I think I was referring to the fact that it says, the superintendent in conjunction with director of technology shall develop and implement appropriate procedures to provide guidance for access to digital resources, guidance shall address supervision, et cetera, and we could, I think it does clearly need to be spelled out, so either we can refer back that would be included by assumption in the superintendent's, you know, the safety procedures and guidelines part. And, or we could also say may, subject to appropriate policy as identified above, or, you know, I think if we're going to have reimbursement, we should have it in our policy, but shall suggests must, in my opinion. And may be requested is, maybe requested to. You're correct, I think we need a clear policy before we can ask anyone for anything of that nature, we also.
We need a clear policy before we can say someone isn't gonna pay. That's what we, like, if
Or-
everyone is
right.
expected to pay, why didn't this person?
Well, or. Yeah, or whether we are going to, because I think there was already discussion about the fact that we know that sometimes an accidents happen. And sometimes there's a 3rd or 4th accident at some point. We're not gonna just say, oh, oops, accidents happen, and we also have abilities to pay and children that are young enough that the question of responsibility for the device is. You know, this suggests everyone in the district, so.
The one thing I will say is that when Christine and Bob and I were working with Liz. On this particular, Liz LaFont, sorry, from MASC, on this particular policy. We also, I think you mentioned at the last meeting, this notion of empowered digital use, right, was sort of a new phrase for folks. Me included. But she actually did provide some examples of digital use form prototypes. That, my suggestion would be either be in a regulation or be embedded in a handbook. And that could be where you could address the issue of, how is it that you would, in a progressive way, set expectations for use or misuse of equipment that is, provided by the district. And you all know this is a hot topic because there were some recent articles, in a study done in Pittsfield about this particular topic. Given the level of damage on the devices. So, I do think this policy is a starting point, but not an end point, because we still have a second piece to do. That then becomes the practical piece for what our students and families are signing off on. Does that make sense?
Which would be the procedures developed
Exactly.
to implement the policy.
I mean, maybe we could say, individuals may be required to reimburse. And then subject, we can either do the subject to, or we know there's gonna be more policies, and we could just put the may be required to reimburse. In here rather than the shall, and knowing that we have more to do.
So you making that as a motion?
I can do that. I would move to amend the, let me get this baby, internet safety policy. IJND. To amend the final paragraph. To say individuals may be requested to reimburse. The district.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second
Any further discussion?
Hey, I don't want to do an amendment on an amendment, but I thought we were gonna say maybe required to reimburse.
Oh, yes, required to, maybe, I'll just fix it, maybe required to, yes, excuse me, maybe required to.
Any further discussion? We'll vote on the amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Any further discussion on the policy? We'll vote on the policy then. So
Do we have
we have a motion to,
Oh, do we have to,
well, we didn't actually have a motion, it's the second reading, we didn't actually formally have a motion.
Could we amend it before we had a motion?
Well, let's go to the motion as amended.
so do we have to read the whole thing?
No.
Okay. So you're,
So I should like to.
so I move to approve policy IJNV. Internet safety, entitled access to digital resources and internet safety. I move to approve that policy as written and amended.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
We are gonna try to get a draft, acceptable use form, power use form together. And hopefully back in front of policy to review, but just understand, we're also doing sort of a 360 look at our handbooks too, at the same time. We're fortunate that, Tim Lee has decided to hang with us for the balance of this semester to help work through that. He had started some of the work, so. Really glad to have Tim, I believe he's on the call today, so thank Tim.
I did.
Right, so school
Okay,
choice,
so, yeah, so school choice policy JFBB, the second read, vote required, and this is the policy that Amy revised after much discussion here at the committee.
so just the key changes that were made to this policy since last you saw it are mostly organizational. In sort of how we sequence what happens. And so under 3, for example, we did ABC, which is first lotteries at both school and then combined second lottery at both schools. So each of the, I think we decided that the first lottery each school would remain as is currently the case. And then we'd have a second drawing if needed, if the seats aren't filled, no later than July 31st. The other thing I just want to point out is that, under state regulation, you have to make a decision we don't have to. You actually have to make a decision not to participate in choice by June 1. We got a reminder today again of that, even though we filed our report 2 months ago. But anyway, that being said, so when you look at number 1 on here, if you were looking at following state regulation, actually would be June 1. But what we are saying is that it would make sense to bring it all together as a package. And I did take some liberty by writing on or around. So I didn't box anyone into a corner that had to happen by January 15th, right? So it gives you a little bit of wiggle space, and Dr. Collins a little space as you all navigate forward. But other than a few little stylistic things, Amy, I don't think we change a lot more. Right?
I did find a little bit of a typo, so I just wonder if we can just clean that up and then when we vote on it, we can. So it just, I think number 3 should read. Just to agree with the way the other paragraphs are reading, that should be taken out, we should just say the selection. And then we just have a duplicate of as follows, so if we just did, there may be drawings for this purpose as follows.
Yeah,
We just duplicated that, so it's just something that didn't get picked up.
thank you.
Sorry about that, sorry for bringing it up, I would, if I just read it shortly before the meeting, or I would have sent an email. Sorry about that.
Why we have lots of people looking at it.
Okay, let's have a motion to approve this policy, JFBB. With the suggested changes.
Bob, I'll make a motion to accept school choice policy JFBB as amended.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just a little bit. So the deadline in 3 is January 31st to apply for choice at LNHS.
Yes.
That's correct.
In item 1, it says on or around January 15th. Is there a chance that they could get out of sequence if around is after the 31st? How far on around the 15th can we go?
Well, I think that, great, I think, so that's a good question. So the question is, can we extend beyond the choice deadline, right?
Right.
We had the decision by the committee on how many seats to open up. I'm not sure it's gonna be a deal breaker one way or the other, or that you're violating any kind of state regulation. I think in my mind, I try to follow just a logical sequence, right? Which is committee makes a decision, they get the enrollment information from the admin team. They decide they want to keep doing this. They set a number of seats as applications are coming in, and then we act on that shortly thereafter. So if you decided that you didn't act on this until, let's say, February 15th, we would still have applications in hand. We'd just be sitting on them until you all decided how many seats you want to open.
That's the piece I was not seeing.
Number 2. Yeah.
Have we ever had an instance where we have an open seat and no applicants? Like after January 31st? Would anyone know?
We don't this
And
year.
maybe 2 grades each one time in 7 years.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So moving on to new business. Please open up your MSBA SOI motion. This is the one that somebody's going to need to read according to state regulations. This has to be done.
I have it last, I'm ready to read it.
All right. Good. All right, so what this is, for those of you watching at home, the school building committee last year entered into a statement of interest with the Mass School Building Authority. And we did extensive work developing a, I don't know, 30 or 40 page document according to the requirements of Mass School Building Authority statement of interest section. And we were unsuccessful in getting approval for going ahead in their process this past year, so we're resubmitting. This is not an unusual event around the state. And so in order to do it, there are some requirements that the school committee and the board of selectmen each vote to approve this, are sending this SOI in, so that it's clear that the town side and the school side know what's going on. And that said, we are expected to indicate in the middle of this document the areas of concern and why we're submitting the document. So,
Okay. So I will make the a motion as follows. Resolved, having convened in an open meeting on March 20th, 2023, prior to the statement of interest submission closing date, the school committee of Lenox, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the statement of interest form dated March 21st, 2023 for the Lenox Memorial Middle and High School located at 197 East Street, Lenox, Massachusetts 01240, which describes and explains the following deficiencies and the priority categories for which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future. Priority 1, replacement or renovation of a building which is structurally unsound or otherwise in a condition seriously jeopardizing the health and safety of school children where no alternative exists. Movement in walls and floor, exterior walls filled with vermiculite infiltrating into building at all. Priority 3, prevention of loss of accreditation. Science classrooms last renovated in 1966, not ADA compliant. Do not meet 2018 MSBA specifications for science classrooms at all. Priority 5, replacement, renovation, or modernization of school facility systems such as roofs, windows, boilers, heating and ventilation systems to increase energy conservation and decrease energy related costs in a school facility. 25-year-old roof, windows in 1966 wing plumbing at all. And priority 7, replacement of or addition to obsolete buildings in order to provide for a full range of programs consistent with state and approved local requirements. Science classrooms, locker rooms, floor cracking, separation. 20% of teaching faculty do not have their own teaching space at all. And hereby further specifically acknowledges that by submitting this statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of an application, the awarding of a grant, or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the Lenox School District to filing an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
thank you. Yeah, nicely done. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And I just want you to know that the Board of Selectmen met last Wednesday and voted similarly to approve this, and now I have to get the documentation together and signed. The one from the selectmen has to be notarized by the town clerk. And we have to put those, attach those and send our document in, but we're ready to send them tomorrow. All those documents are prepared. So. Thank you.
Yeah, we should thank you too. You've done a lot of work. So we appreciate all the work that you've done. I mean, people are just seeing the tip of the iceberg here in terms of all the documentation you had to put together, the team had to put together to support the application. So the application is many pages, like 40
Yeah.
pages or something.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, a large amount of the work was done last year. I just updated it. Yes, thank you. You know, yeah, there's a lot took place last year. This year was a lot simpler to do it. Obviously, we hope something will happen. I'm gonna come back to this in a minute, because Laura and I had a discussion at the finance subcommittee meeting the other night. But the approval of policy manual sections A, B, C, and D is not gonna happen tonight. Liz LaFawn has been busy with many superintendent searches, including Northampton, where just last week, they had her do 23 forums. They're interviewing tonight. They're interviewing this week. I think tonight is one of the nights they're interviewing all the finalists, but she said 12 people showed up at 23 forums. Some forums had nobody show up, but only 12 people at the 23.
And they got
forums.
really
In Northampton.
putting on a lot of.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
But she said, she was just about ready with sections A and B, but we couldn't get them to us in time for me to send them out. But we'll definitely have them for the April 12th meeting. Christine won't be here. But she called in from the rock climbing. Nevada. So it'll be up to Megan and me to kind of run through that, but I think it should be relatively straightforward.
But we'll get them ahead of time.
You will get them ahead of them. You'll get whatever we can present, because actually Christine and I have a meeting next Monday to go over more of the policies.
And if any chunks along the way, just to.
Yeah, as soon as I have A and B, I'll send them. C and D, we finished with, we just haven't got them in the form that to present here, and we may have other sections done prior to April 12th or April 26th. We hope to.
Thank you for that too. I know it's a lot of labor.
So I want to go back to the discussion about the MSBA. If we got into their system and they said, you're a go, the next step is the feasibility study. And that's a extensive process. And it came up at our subcommittee meeting the other day, the idea that potentially we should go ahead and do the feasibility study without MSBA. MSBA, once they approve you, then you start getting funded partially for your feasibility work. Our thought was maybe we could do the feasibility study independent, and then we would know, are we talking about renovating the existing building, or are we talking about a new building? What's the extent, what could we learn if we did it ourselves? I don't know if you want to add to that or not.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is just that, one scenario is they give us a thumbs up this year. We're probably still 6 to 8 years away from moving into a new building or having a renovation complete. It's certainly plausible we're 5 years away from a thumbs up, in which case we're 10+ years away from actually moving into a new building. And so I think it probably behooves us to make a CapEx plan for the next 5 to 10 years. That is for the place that students will be for the next 5 to 10 years. That's not investing in new stuff that's going to get ripped down, but that's also better than just sort of patching holes in the wall. And if we complete the feasibility study, we will know where we are headed and therefore what it makes sense to do. If it's just going to be a renovation, for instance, there are parts we should just say, we'll get started on some of the renovations. And obviously things we do without MSBA, we have to pay for ourselves. But there are also things we're going to want to do that MSBA might not pay for anyway. And so we could actually sort of sequence out a strategy of what the next 5 to 10 years looks like, as opposed to just waiting however many years until we get the thumbs up and then starting flat-footed from there. The flip side is it's not free. MSBA would pay a portion of the feasibility study if we wait. We pay for it ourselves if we don't. But as a share of the sort of total scale of what we need to do over the next decade, I think it will more than pay for itself in us being able to do a better job planning and choosing projects to start on. So that was the discussion, I think.
Yeah, so I had, I called MSBA on Friday and I didn't get a hold of them in time to talk to anybody, but Kate DeCristofaro, who was one of the people who came out last September, and was kind of the lead person, kind of led the meeting. There were 6 people came from actually all over the country, but a couple from Boston and New York, and a couple, I think, from Washington. And they had actually done a pretty extensive review of our proposal, our statement of interest, and they were coming to see did the reality match the words we put on paper. So I talked to Kate today, and I said that we were considering this idea of doing a feasibility study ourselves, and she said, well. You could definitely do that. There's Concord and Cohasset have gone ahead and are doing that because they don't want to wait any longer, but once you get accepted into the process, you then have to do another feasibility. Even if we did a feasibility study, we then have to do another one with them. If we paid for the first one ourselves, then they would be partially reimbursing the one that fell under their bailiwick. I also, and she said, I asked her like to give me just a rough ballpark about what a feasibility study costs with the folks who are going, with them. And, there's a module on their website, which is, many pages long, but about 18 of which, it really goes into the detail of what their feasibility study involves. And she said that she couldn't give me hard numbers, but she said they're coming in typically 750,000 to 2.5 million, depending on the size and scope of what you're trying to do for the feasibility study. That said, I also spoke to the town manager last week before I spoke to Kate DeCristofaro. And he was not opposed to our going ahead, felt that we could potentially use some ARPA money. And perhaps look into our budget and see if there were anything left in either ESSER or, if there was some other funding that we could potentially put something together. I don't think he was thinking on the neighborhood of $1 million, however. I think he was thinking on the neighborhood of $500,000 perhaps, or something like that. But I guess in talking with Kate, she felt that maybe we should wait a year before we decide to do something on our own and see what happens during the next cycle. So that we wouldn't necessarily be duplicating things. But I thought that, I had favorable comments from the town manager. And favorable funding. I have no idea how long ARPA money is available, but if we did decide to do it, and if ARPA money was still available, that would fund a good portion of it anyway, it looked like from his perspective. But Kate really kind of said, why don't you hold the line, look at this module 3, the feasibility study module, and see like what it entails, because if we did our own feasibility study, we would need to be very clear. We'd have to do quite a bit of work to figure out what do we want the scope of it to be from whoever we hire. She said, if we did it, we could then share that with whoever gets hired, in the formal MSBA process. But they would still need to there'd be likely a whole lot more that they would need to do in their study. So
I like the idea though, trying to get a head start a little bit and get some of our groundwork down, so maybe there's some way to do some of the space planning and visioning and things like that would have to go into one.
yeah, no, I agree, because that's all part of it is the envision.
That's the hard thing, right? What you want your program to do for you.
Right.
So that raises a question for me, and this is the area that I consider myself to be least well versed in, so I'll be doing some homework, but is there the ability to hire a consultant for feasibility of the feasibility? In other words, similar to what Bob's saying, we hire a consultant to help us determine scope, whatever all the terms are, and things, some information that we might need a little bit more help on. That would then be fed into the feasibility, but not necessarily a duplication of effort. Is that something that we can still look into? We don't necessarily have to decide tonight that.
We had last year as part of our submission, we had to have an engineering report. So we hired the architectural firm GRA from Waltham, I think. And they did an engineering study of the existing building, but without talking about any of the existing wall issues. They looked at the building and came up with, a number of recommendations and potential costs for those recommendations. To the $220 million, if we just were bringing it up to code, fixing some areas that need to be fixed and bringing stuff up to code. That document, along with someone given, a targeted, this is what we'd like you to do. Let us know if we open up a wall, what does that trigger? what does that trigger in terms of the vermiculite in the walls? Is there, or does it not trigger anything if it's on the floor? Whatever. You know, so I think there's, you know, it would be great for us to know that we're either looking at, that we could realistically be looking at a renovation, or we need to be looking at the idea of a new building. So, you know, I don't think we have to make that decision tonight, but I think it's definitely something to think about. I know Kate was saying, why don't you wait a year? I can go back and talk to Chris again and let he doesn't know that about this conversation. But we would have the time to really articulate what it is we're looking for from the feasibility, the initial feasibility study. And
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. One is, Veronica's question. We did a pre-feasibility to field when we built the Conic. It was focused more on educational visioning, so we had, I think, 50 or 60 people over the course of 3 days, workshopping around what we wanted to see in the high school. And also asking sort of the big question, you know, back then was, do we need 2 schools or 1? But it was also kind of like, how do you want to organize your high school? What does it look like? And sort of thinking around this kind of traditional to progressive continuum across a variety of kind of organizational domains. The second point I want to make is one that I'm hoping I'm going to get this right, Lauren, is that we, and Bob made this point, we have to continue to invest in the school. And so one thing MSBA wants to see is that you maintain the facilities that you have. If you haven't, they're not psyched to be your partner, right?
Right.
And invest money in a community that can't maintain its current. But the idea is, can we strategically invest in the facility over the next few years so that we're moving towards something?
Yeah.
With a plan in mind, rather than just saying, hey, we got to do the front doors, we got to do the the security system. Is there a way to start actually chipping away at this kind of ultimate design that we're heading towards? So I thought that was a really good point from both of you that was made.
Well, I will just say, and I know, again, we don't have anything before us at this minute, but the idea of both, the sort of yes and of the idea of visioning, what is it we really want? And if we're faced with even $20 million to spend, I mean, I think the original Lenox 2000 proposal, the entire, looking at Bob, because he lived it, you know, the entire proposal for the renovation of both schools was 30 million, 26 million, 14 million, so
well, we
obviously
had
we're living in a different world, and I'm not
so
trying to
maybe
pretend
16
like
million total.
I don't want to do the back in my day, but I do think when we're looking at just the recommendations of the engineering report, which we understand was really, this is just to get things where they need to be, and looking at $20 million, the concept of that broader conversation, the visioning that has a lot of stakeholders involved seems really important and doesn't have to wait for feasibility. The expansion of the engineering report perhaps maybe looking to Oren's point about being very strategic about what we do. Maybe that is something, again, that is a place where we're not doing a feasibility just to redo the feasibility, but we're getting the information. Seems to me 2 places that would be really important, right? And we have what do we need to get up to compliance? So you said that information is there. And then moving forward with a conversation about all the what ifs without just the visioning idea. I really think that would be fabulous, because I think it's really important, because I don't think I'd be saying anything that's unknown, undiscussed, or controversial. If I say, before we build something like a brand new school for Lenox, we have to really talk about how our school is structured and the way in a lot of ways.
Well, and the feasibility study outlines the types of things, all the things that they would do, and you know, visioning the use of the educational use is one of the biggest things.
Well, I got 2 questions on this. One is the feasibility study that the building authority, we would engage the building, when should we get approval of the building authority? Are we still in a position, is the scope at that point still defined, or is it just the entire building is looked at? And there's no defined scope other than we're looking at this thing and we're totally impartial and we're gonna tell you what to do. Or not tell you what to do, but tell you what your options are. Or is the scope, or do we know it, or is the scope defined in that?
My sense is you'd be looking at options during feasibility. You'd be doing some preliminary design and then some costing. So, yeah, you'd be looking at options.
They
So-
look at the educational program, the summary of the space, evaluation of existing conditions, and that's kind of what we got from GRA last year, was the evaluation of existing conditions. Site development requirements, preliminary evaluation of alternatives. And then they get to where the MSBA reviews where you are at that point. And then they come up with a preferred schematic report. Again, evaluation of existing conditions, final evaluation of alternatives, preferred solution, local actions,
Right.
approvals, and so on. So,
So we're looking at educational vision for the space as well as the space itself.
Right.
And then, so my second question related to some of the capital projects we've been discussing over the past couple of years. And what impact, if any, do they have on those improvements that we've identified and such as our lab, such as our lab situation? Does this in any way? Where do those now stand in queue of things, so to speak?
well, in the current capital budget, there are some improvements to the science rooms. We can't go fully and add space. We're not talking about, in what our capital money is going for initially is to get some drainage stuff, some sink stuff working. It hasn't been for years. We're talking the 1966 building, and maybe it worked in 1966, but it hasn't worked for many years. But it's not talking, I think when we did the 1998 rebuild, it was cosmetic in the science classrooms, for example. And in 2018, the MSBA came out with some model, or MSBA and DESE came out with some model science classrooms. And we're not in compliance with ADA. There's a lot of things we're not in compliance with in the science classrooms. So, that's one of the biggest issues. Another glaring issue are the locker rooms. Also, I think they have some ADA issues. There was some changes made at some point to improve them, but I think there are major issues with the locker rooms. And then other areas too, but those are two that really stand out. And then there's always the issue about the walls, the exterior walls, and then the movement of the interior walls. Because there's still cracking, there's still spaces that are widening in the existing building.
So then, are these the things that we need to keep maintaining? When we talk about being able to maintain and DESE seeing us maintain, these are the things that are gonna be ongoing within underneath this other process. While this other process is.
We're gonna be trying to improve areas that we can improve. But some of the areas go way beyond
Yeah,
the scope of the money that we have available to. Well, at this point, we could always try to get approval for more money, but, there's not much we can do with the science classroom to bring them up to the 2018 standards without more space. And some of the, mechanical operations in those rooms. Some stuff would, you need to walk the building with me or with Jeff, to really appreciate some of the issues.
yeah. Not been in those classrooms.
Just I don't mean to press this point home, but the idea of envisioning, I think, is people look at that there's kind of a wide interpretation of what that means. And so the MSBA at some point will require under feasibility or filing sort of a template, boilerplate educational plan. But I will tell you that that may not go as deep as you all want to go in terms of really thinking about how do we use a new facility, the design of a facility to also influence what happens in the facility. And, you know, if you wanna do direct instruction, build lecture spaces, right? That's easy. If you want, to have varying delivery methods where you're doing a whole group, small group, one-on-one, regrouping, flexible space, that looks a lot different. So, so the point I'm making is that the ed visioning work is really about sort of philosophically what you believe in terms of teaching and learning as you're advancing your system forward, you know, into the future, in a way that you think is going to have the best impact for your kids and your community. There is a group of certified ed facilities planners. Some are better than others. There are some who are very provocative, who will give you all kinds of really interesting examples that you could use to think about. I mean, an easy example would be, what do y'all want to do with your middle school, right? That you talked about that.
Right.
Is this an opportunity to start thinking about how also the space could drive the way you're thinking about the middle school? And so that's one avenue, would be to hire a facilities planner to do that. And those some of those guys are architects, but most are really lean more on the education side, but they feed the information to the architects who ultimately then do the drawing, right? Do the engineering. The other way to approach it is you get a partner, like the Bar Foundation. And you say, hey, let's engage with a group that's doing research around rethinking high school. And you partner with them, and they send you, they help the finance teams to research, think about, go visit, all, you know, other sites that are doing things differently, not with the understanding that you're going to go and adopt it full scale, but you're beginning to take pieces that you think resonate with you and your community to something you want to replicate in a new school. So I think when you go to do this, it's an amazing opportunity, and not just to update your facility, but also think deeply about how you're organizing and delivering. So I would just encourage you to think about that.
Yeah, and this, you know, if you go to the Mass School Building Authority site and you click on Build with Us, and then scroll down to the modules, there's at the very bottom of the section which talks about kind of the different steps in the process. There's a button to click on to take you to the modules. I had to search a little bit for it. But then, you know, because Kate had told me, look at module 3. I've printed 20 pages here, but there were a number of other documents that came with it, which were sample documents that you would use to articulate your existing space and things like that. So if you want to look at that, you know, I can certainly help anybody get there, or if you just go into Massachusetts School Building Authority and under the section Build with Us, and look around a little bit, you'll find the same stuff I did. Some of you are probably a whole lot more clever than I am. So
I'm gonna say a little bit on the lines of what Jake was saying about, you know, being able to see in action. I mean, at the MASC conference last year, in November, some of what was really great was being in an hour or so session where some of the people that do that talk about the educational purpose of the way education was being delivered, particularly this group was talking about elementary schools and how they structure, how they come in as consultants, and they are teachers who shifted to this work about the ways that space changes the learning experience for students. And one particular powerful story, a presentation by one teacher who's focused on special ed, talked about a student with a lot of sensory issues and how that student really struggled to be in a traditional classroom, and some of the flexible ways that they were able to actually meet the needs of that student. They took away the student created, and this was with low cost items, but talking in a way about that it's not just about, do we have a pretty building and do we have fun, colorful chairs, but it sometimes is actually about, these are the students we have in our classrooms, these are some of the needs that they have, and these are the way the teachers are trying, and special service providers, special educators, OT, PT, and all of that are trying to meet needs that are different because of what they know, because of what they've researched, because what they found works and what doesn't work. As opposed to, sometimes, used to be, well, we'll pull this child out, put them in the quiet room or something, and how. You can do that all day long, it's not actually serving the needs of the student, it's not making the situation better, it's not helping other students. From being disrupted from their learning, so it was really pretty powerful, it was an hour or so, but it's very inspiring. Because it was connecting, that it's not just about, like I said, pretty buildings, it's really about how is education being delivered to all needs and all students in a way with the information, research, knowledge, and education practices that are being used. So it was really very, very holistic, but very informative and very practical too, because the reality is if our goal is it should be, we need to meet the education needs of all students. Then how can we do that? And in this case, they showed both, fancy spaces, but also very practical. I mean, some of what was used was fabric and cardboard to help create a space for a student. So I found that part of it and understanding it better really, really helpful. And so if anybody's, again, it'll be time soon to register. Early registration will be like, I think in May or June, Amy, for the conference in maybe August. For the conference in November, but there's really a great opportunity for us.
More May, June.
Okay, we get a discount if we register early, but for us to have a chance to be present in short bits that will inform, when we're sitting at this table, right? We're not gonna have everybody come in and do a colorful presentation, but Bert 12 presented, some of the collaboratives presented, and this was particularly interesting because it was really about the building process, but also about meeting the educational needs of students, and it was pretty, like I said, it was really kind of cool to hear from those. And that's my little plug, but also the fact that I really learned a lot in a short amount of time about how that works.
Okay, so moving on to subcommittees. Governance and leadership has been,
Well, sorry, Bob, just one last thing on the building thing. We're not gonna make any substantive decisions right now, but if we want to do anything in the next year, we would need the money appropriated now, I assume. We're at this year's town meeting, and even then it would give us.
Chris didn't think we would necessarily need to have an appropriate town meeting.
If it's ARPA, or just regardless.
If it's ARPA or if it's ARPA plus ESSER plus potentially some money that we may, I don't know if there's any left in this year's budget, but he said we could probably put together from existing resources without going to town meeting.
Okay.
He said, he did say, however, if we wanted to go to town meeting and ask for the money, we could begin to be developing a buy-in from the community. So he said, not to ignore that idea, but we don't need to rush to that. Because he felt that we would probably have the money in some other sources.
And we've also had, at least the last few years, the select board and Chris have been putting forward a mid-year meeting, I think in November. I don't know if they'll do it every year, depending on
I think
needs.
so. I think the plan.
So I think they've decided that waiting the full year usually is a good practice of trying to create that early November slot. So that's also a possibility. I think if we have a better sense of what we need and we have to, we can do it then.
Okay, governance and leadership.
Which talked about the policies, which we will review and bring to the committee in the next meeting, and we have a follow-up meeting for the subcommittee scheduled for next Monday, the 22nd at 6 p.m.
Yeah, human resources.
The negotiations with Unit C are ongoing and proceeding well. We're meeting on Mondays. We will have an HR subcommittee meeting in the very near future, just to review how that's going generally.
We haven't scheduled that yet, right?
But no, we haven't said that yet. Yes.
Teaching women in culture.
So we did have a meeting actually scheduled for this Wednesday, but the principal interviews are happening and I'm on that, as is Megan. So I've asked if everybody's okay with us meeting, we're meeting on April the 12th. I think, we've been going through the strategic plan and a lot of the initiatives, and I think as we solidified our leadership team, that's also gonna really be able to help. And we got a lot of information at our last meeting in February from Jake about where a lot of the initiatives that relate to teaching and learning and culture are being worked on.
Okay, and finance met last week, two of us. Christine was at the Dropkick Murphys Fenway Park.
Ah, fun.
She zoomed in from there, no. Um, And school building we talked about, so. We were at a point where we could actually, it's not still light out, Jake, I'm sorry about that, but it's way earlier than it might have been.
8 before 9.
So, somebody wanna make a motion?
I move to adjourn.
Second. In favor?
All right.
Aye.
Right.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.